from George Mason University. We usually have another talk later on in the afternoon that will give more of a deep dive into this technology, but wanted to just present a quick overview of some work going on in our lab right now towards developing sonomyographic control for upper limb prostheses. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, that means using ultrasound images to control prosthesis. Just some quick background. We know that traditional myoelectric prostheses can be very difficult to use, and in fact, about a quarter or maybe more of myoelectric users ultimately choose to not use the prosthesis. That said, about 74% of those people say that they would reconsider trying a prosthesis if improvements were made to their functionality. So this is kind of the space that we're working in. Now, the question as researchers that we need to answer is, what's the best way to translate a person's intended movement into actual movement of the prosthesis? Most technologies right now sort of fall into this lower left corner of a plot of the ability of that technology to accurately detect an intended movement versus its surgical invasiveness. So right now, standard myoelectric controllers have fairly limited ability to accurately detect those movements, but the positive side is they're completely non-invasive to use. Now, a lot of the emerging technologies right now are showing comparatively improved ability to accurately detect those movements, but many of them require surgery in order to use, and this can be as invasive as brain surgery. So some people who maybe are a little bit more interested in taking risks are okay with trying these technologies, but there's definitely a segment of the population that is not going to be interested in pursuing those options. And that's where our work comes in. As I'll show you throughout this talk, we believe that our approach has improved ability to accurately detect movements, but we're doing this completely non-invasively. As I've said, our approach is through sonomyography. So that means we're using ultrasound to detect muscle activity. So the idea with ultrasound is that we can place an ultrasound transducer on someone's limb and emit sound waves down into their arm. And those sound waves will reflect off of anatomical structures, and it allows us to essentially take a cross-sectional view through the arm. This is not a real image of an arm, but you kind of get the idea that all of the muscles within the arm fall into very defined compartments. And so as someone contracts those muscles in order to initiate a grasp, the relative size and location of those pockets is going to change. Now, if you look at an actual ultrasound image, it's not quite so clean, but just to orient you to some of the muscle groups here, the top of the frame here is the volar aspect of the arm, so kind of the underside of the arm. And as you look down into the image, that's deeper into the arm. So you can see that the bones of the arm, the radius and the ulnar, are at the bottom of that frame. Okay, so what happens when someone actually initiates a movement? So in the video that's playing right now, you can see the muscle contractions that are associated with someone flexing their index finger. But if you ask them to perform a different movement, like flex their middle finger, that pattern of activation changes a little bit because they're using different muscles to initiate this movement. So the trick for us then is to be able to identify the differences in these different patterns and translate that to movement of a prosthesis. The system that we've developed, as I've said, uses ultrasound. This is actually just a clinical ultrasound system for the moment, so this is very similar to what you might come across in a doctor's office. And we'll attach it to an amputee's residual limb and have them go through a short training procedure where we ask them to perform a series of different grasping movements, and we use those images to build up a database of reference images that correspond to those grasping movements. Just a quick video to show you a little bit about how this works. In this video, you can see that we have a patient who has an ultrasound probe on his amputated limb. We're recording ultrasound movements in real time. That's what is shown in the left panel there. And And the data that's being plotted at the bottom is essentially a correlation between the incoming signals, the incoming ultrasound frames, and a frame that's recorded when the subject is completely at rest. So these lower plateaus correspond to when the subject is at rest, and the higher plateaus correspond to when the subject has fully completed the grasp. Those frames are what goes into our database. Once we have that database constructed, then as we record new images in real time, we can compare each of those images to the frames that are in the database and try to identify what most closely matches the grasp in the database. So essentially, we're recording these signals, sending them through a classification algorithm, and ultimately to a prosthesis. And the end result is, skipped a video here, that we can achieve, sorry about that. There we go. We can achieve individual level finger control of a prosthetic hand. And you can see that the movement being initiated by the participant here is very closely matched by the prosthesis. Now, another advantage of this technology is that not only can we achieve the motion end state, we can actually control all of the positions in between rest and motion completion. So you can see in this video, the subject is kind of slowly performing a power grasp movement. He's making a fist. And the prosthesis doesn't automatically just jump to fully close. He's actually able to step it through from 0 to 100% of task completion through that grasp. Okay, so putting this all together, what happens when we actually put this prosthesis on a person? So for comparison, the video that's playing right now is showing a prosthesis user who has a myoelectric prosthesis, standard direct control, and he's actually owned this system for about 10 years, so he's a very experienced user. But even so, you can tell that he's really struggling to pick up individual blocks to move them over this barrier. He's very slow at this task, and you can actually see a lot of involvement of his upper body as he's trying to manipulate the prosthesis where it needs to be. Now, in contrast, the video playing on the right is showing the same participant using a prosthesis controlled by sonomyography. And this is after essentially no training. He's basically put this on and is already showing clear visual improvements in his functionality. So he's much faster at picking up the blocks. You can see his movements are much smoother. There's a lot less compensation involved in his upper limb, or his upper body. So these are all exciting things. What I want to close on is that one question that you may have been thinking throughout this whole presentation is that ultrasound machines are giant, if you've ever seen one, and you might be wondering why someone would ever want to drag one of those around with themselves just to use a prosthesis. That's a great question, and that's actually what we're working on right now, to try to miniaturize an ultrasound system so that it's small enough that we can incorporate it into a prosthetic socket. So if you're interested in hearing more about this work, we'll be speaking again after lunch in more depth on this topic. But just as a teaser right now, I'll say that we've had some success in this area. All right, so there's been a lot of people working on this project for a lot of years to make it happen, so thank you to all of them, and thank you all for your time.